I still get comments like, "You speak English very well."
The director tells me, you need to be blacker.
We're all not like that. We don't have to have that accent. We don't have to, because I'm third generation. My Spanish is really bad.
With women from the Middle East, it's like the most offensive, the most painful stereotypes exist.
Women on the staff reportedly had to sign an agreement that they would not ever sue for, sexual harassment.
The writers were talking about their own sex lives. They were talking about the cast.
Renee Zellweger in Cold Mountain played a character that was actually a black slave in the novel, and they wanted to cast Renee, so they turned her into an Appalachian white woman.
Books that have been made into films where the character was gay, and in the film version, they're straight. And you're like, what? Why?
Actors are employees who are entitled to the protections of both Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and to the Fair Employment and Housing Act. So they're not in a category unto themselves where they're not protected.
Title VII, which is the federal statute that bans discrimination, has a special exception for certain jobs where it's necessary for someone to be a particular sex. That does not apply to race at all, though. So that's one interesting thing, that there is a broader exception for some sex-based discrimination, but there is no exception for race. However, even with respect to sex, it's a very narrow exception. You have to show a tight connection between the sex of the applicant and the job restriction. So for instance, in a Supreme Court case involving prison guards, where you had an all-male prison, they said it would be dangerous to allow women to be prison guards because they'd be vulnerable to sexual assault. So that was a distinction that the court said counted as a BFOQ. However, most courts have rejected arguments about a BFOQ. For instance, Southwest Airlines once argued that flight attendants had to be female because they wanted to have sexy stewardesses. And the court said, no, that's not a valid reason, and rejected that argument.
You can't have a law firm where you only hire white males because your argument is that juries respond better to white males. They think that they have better authority. All of these things may be true. You still cannot hire only attorneys who are white and male. You could paint your walls in your law firm a certain palette and say, well, because of the palette, I only want people working here who are very fair-skinned, because dark skin will counter the wonderful cream color I have on the wall or something like that. That is an artistic choice, but it has nothing to do with hiring lawyers, with running a law firm, no matter what creative arguments you make about the color of your walls.
When someone is part of the mainstream, in other words, it's like being part of the mainstream in your thinking and belief system means, and social groups, means it's that thing where you drive in the parking lot, these parking lots that had the spikes up, that if you drive out of the parking lot, the spikes lay down. So it's all very smooth. But if you try to go the other way on the spikes, it'll puncture your tires. So when you're in the mainstream, in the dominant part, a part of the dominant culture, you won't even know that you're ignorant. It's not possible, because everything kind of gets smooth. And there are so many people to support your point of view when you're part of the mainstream. And so it's really only the moments when there's some kind of conflict or something that you have an opportunity to wake up and go, hey, maybe there's more to this than I thought. And for people that don't like to be uncomfortable, they're going to reduce the opportunity of that even occurring, like exposing themselves to things. And this is how ignorance just stays ignorant a lot. And when I say mainstream, that's ignorance with power. So it gets to make the decisions for other people that don't have the same power or same way of thinking.
The day before Thanksgiving, I'm fired. Because apparently what triggered the whole firing at that particular moment was because I'd put up the rules in the Actors Equity Association rule book about employment discrimination, or about discrimination and equal opportunity, and I'd put these around my mirror. I had a bunch of stuff over there, but I put them around my dressing area, and the director, Catherine Conte, saw them. Why she was at my dressing table, I don't know. She saw them, took a picture, sent them to the producer, Jeannie Linders, who then, 3 days later, fired me. Seems to me an open shut case of race discrimination and retaliation. Most clearly retaliation.
It went to an arbitrator for a decision, and that he ruled in favor of the producers and found that there was not discrimination. And after having read the materials, my view was that the reasoning of the arbitrator was not sound, that he overlooked many instances of discrimination and seemed very deferential to sort of protecting the status quo in the industry. I think that that's a huge problem here, that there's no guarantee, even if actors do challenge the status quo, that courts will be sensitive and recognize it. This is linked to a broader problem in Title VII jurisprudence. Many courts are dismissive of Title VII cases brought by people of color and women in sort of a standard garden variety context, like an office, a teacher. Just think about any sort of job. It's very hard to win these cases, especially race cases, no matter who you are. When you add in the entertainment industry in the context of artistic freedom, it gets even more complicated. So there are a lot of forces that reinforce the status quo and make it hard for people to even see this as an issue of discrimination that requires redress.
The courts seem to be very, very reluctant to actually apply the BFOQ doctrine. And BFOQ stands for Bona Fide Occupational Qualification. And it's supposed to be the doctrine that comes into play when an employer objectively makes a business decision based upon a protected class. Whether it's, we only want to have Chinese waiters in a Chinese restaurant, or we need to cast a white person as Abraham Lincoln in a drama about the Civil War. And to show a BFOQ, you really need to show that it's a necessity to have this race-based distinction. It's a very, very high threshold that's very, very difficult to achieve.
When you decide that your audience is going to respond better to a Black woman playing a professional person who speaks Ebonics, or who rolls her neck and pops her eyes out and puts her hands on her hips, if that actually is not connected, if your stereotype direction is not connected to what you're trying to do, which in this case from Menopause a Musical was make women who are menopausal feel better, to make them have a sense of community about their symptoms. This is your goal. This is the goal that even Jeannie Linders testified. The show has nothing to do with race.
People don't seem to want to challenge their ignorance very much. First of all, we rarely know it. Right? I don't know my own. We all have areas that we're ignorant or unknowing in. I don't know my areas of ignorance myself until I bump into something, right? That's how I find out about it, because it's like a big invisible ball I carry on me. And then when I hit something, then I feel the ball. And so that's the moment, actually, when those moments are not usually pleasant for any of us, right? But that's a moment where you can shut down, or you can open up and go, oh, I didn't realize I didn't know something here. Let me at least listen.
I think that there's still this tremendous amount of racism in the entertainment industry. There's a tremendous amount of sexism, of homophobia. It's unfortunately reflecting the society that we live in. And I know that we hear a lot about the struggles of African American actors in Hollywood and being pigeonholed into certain types of roles or into expecting to act a certain way.
I know of directors who have had the same thing, like who would get cast for like a telenovela type of thing, and then they say, we want a Latino, or I think you get a lot with kind of the so-called black comedies on what used to be the UPN and now the CW. Like, if you look at their staffs, somehow or other somebody makes a decision that only black people can write for black people, and you'll use those to beef up your overall demographics of how many African Americans are working in the industry, but they're all on those same shows. And because it does reflect a bias that you need to be of that race to understand the product. I don't get it. But there's, I think, an awful lot of that, even by the people who consider themselves liberal.
I know what this dress name is. Sleeping Beauty. And mine is Snow White.